I'm really grateful to be here. I want to start off by saying that there's a time in my life where the concept of sitting up here and talking about this experience or being even comfortable in my own skin would be the furthest thing from my mind. So the fact that I'm here and able to talk about this is a miracle to me. I'm actually not going to tell you my conditions that I was diagnosed with till the end, because I want you to try to figure out what I had to come back from. I just want to start with some facts that I've lived through about mental illness, explain my understanding of mental illness and how I've kind of come out of it, and then kind of go through what my experience was and what life is like for me now. Just real quick, approximately 1 in 5 adults in the U.S., 43.8 million or 18.5% experiences mental illness in any given year. Approximately 1 in 25 adults in the U.S., 9.8 million or 4% experiences a serious mental illness in any given year, and that substantially interferes with or limits one or more major life activity. 6.9% of adults in the U.S., 16 million, had at least one major depressive episode in the past year. These are some other facts that I could fall into. 70% of youth in juvenile justice systems have at least one mental health condition, and at least 20% live with a serious mental illness. That part of my past, the juvenile justice system, rather. Only 41% of adults in the U.S. with a mental health condition receive mental health services in the past year. Among adults with serious mental illness, 62.9% received mental health services in the past year. Just over half of children aged 8 to 15 received mental health services in the past year. Half of all chronic mental illnesses begin by the age of 14, 3/4 by age 24. Despite effective treatment, there are long delays, sometimes decades, between the first appearance of symptoms and when people get help. Mood disorders, including major depression, dysthymic disorder, and bipolar disorder, are the third most common cause of hospitalization in the U.S. for both young adults and for both youth and adults aged 18 to 44. Individuals living with serious mental illness face an increased risk of having chronic medical conditions. Adults in the U.S. living with serious mental illness die on average 25 years earlier than others, largely due to treatable medical conditions. And this didn't affect me directly, but a family member. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the U.S., the third leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 14, and the second leading cause of death for people aged 15 to 24. And these are some things that are pertinent to my own experience. This is a quote. I don't know where I heard this one from, but it's something that's really valid to me and has helped me heal a lot. Mental health is a normal response to abnormal circumstances. It's a normal thing, otherwise people wouldn't have it come up, really. It's just things occur in life, people don't know how to deal with them, so then there's this differentiation from traditional ways of functioning. There's a doctor who his speeches and his approach to mental health overall has really helped me. And Dr. Gabor Mate states that mental illness and addiction, which is part of my personal story, is created by biopsychosocial factors. The biological factors of that biopsychosocial would be genetically predetermined by family history. For me, I have a family history of mental illness, so that makes me more likely to have it. Psychological stuff. Basically, our psychological state begins to develop as soon as the brain begins to develop, from what I understand, and all that information is being processed in the environment we grow up in. All that stuff is contained within, and a large part of how we operate within the world is established, I want to say, by the age of 7. So when you have certain traumatic things that occur within that time frame, whether or not people might perceive them as traumatic to the individual, that can increase it. So with the biological factors and the psychological factors, even more likelihood. And then finally, sociological. This is created by home environment, school environment, and later on in life, work environment. I've been affected by every single one of those factors, and it's not anybody's fault. Don't blame anybody. That's just how life happened, you know? And Dr. Gabor Mate's research has found a key factor in all mental illness is some sort of traumatic event that occurs, and he goes on to define trauma as being something that shouldn't have happened that did, or something that didn't happen that should have. And when you look at it, trauma as that, everybody in this room has had a traumatic experience, likely more than one as well. And since it's defined by the individual, what's traumatic, not even defined by them, that's just how they receive that experience as traumatic. And now I'd just like to talk about some of the stuff that Dr. Gabor Mate, his perception on it. You only need one of the previous mentioned precursors to have mental illness. Each successive one increases the likelihood, like I mentioned. And also, when you look at this with an open mind, all those factors, it becomes apparent we all have had mental illness to some degree or have experienced it. And this is my own personal opinion, but mental illness is a spectrum disorder. Some of us are more affected by it than others. Some of us hide it better. And some of us get over it better than others. So everybody in this room has probably had some kind of mental health issue at one point, but they're just able to bounce back from it.
Ross, could you slow down just a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. You got it. The difference between people who suffer chronically is their inability to bounce back like the rest of the population from these conditions. So biological, these are some solutions. Biological, genetics have been proven to be reprogrammable through epigenetics, and this is not pseudoscience, it is evidence-based science. So people can effectively reprogram how their genetics operate by changing how they talk to themselves, what they eat, how they treat their bodies, and other habits. This is stuff that I've actually done that has changed my life as well. Psychological states have been able to be changed, again, by habits, developing a mindfulness practice, practicing deep breathing, practicing meditation, practicing yoga and other habits. And meditation and yoga aren't tied to specific religions like some people may think. They can be like with those things, but they don't have to be. So you can get the benefits of it regardless of what your beliefs are. In sociological, social groups can be changed. One of the largest sticking points can be the sociological group. Many people with mental illness isolate, or they can find themselves in comfortable but unhealthy social groups. That was largely my experience. I was either isolated or hanging out with the wrong people. And sometimes it's even the people with the best intentions who hurt us the most.
Would you say that again for all of us to hear?
Yeah, sometimes it's even the people with the best intentions who hurt us the most. And I'll kind of elaborate on that more from my own personal experience. And it's not like I want to attack anybody or point fingers at anybody. It's just from somebody who's experienced that kind of stuff. One of the things is stigma. Once you have these conditions too, people can begin to identify the individual with the disease. Like, I've even heard people in the mental health community share as like more of they're living with the condition than with the child that they raised or the significant other that they fell in love with or whoever it is, where they identify more with the illness than the person. And the labels of a particular mental illness are designed to help identify methods for treatment, not to be prisons for those who suffer from the conditions. So when I wrote, sometimes it's even the people with the best intentions who hurt us the most. After my experiences, I felt like everything that I did was viewed under a microscope. I was always questions about what I was doing, and I'm a relatively offbeat person as it is. So having some mental health experiences and then having everything filtered through, is this that, or is this or is this that? It became where I was like constantly wondering if everything I was doing was crazy, and I kind of lost sense of myself. The other thing that really kind of hindered me more was when I had more like depressive episodes, was people always trying to get me to do stuff. Oh, you should go here, you should do this, why don't you try that, why don't you do this? And it made me feel like crap because I physically could not do it. The one fellowship I'm in, they talk about recovery from addiction. And one of the things they say is the addict can be reasoned with, beaten, counseled, so on and so forth. But until they're ready to get better, there's nothing you can do about it. And that was one of the things for me. I had a supportive family, but all those suggestions hurt me more than helped me, made me feel worse than better. People telling me to be happy when I felt like crap doesn't make sense. And again, it's not that people are doing anything wrong.
I think we talk about that a great deal in our family-to-family education class.
Well, that's good to know.
And that readiness factor is the single most important piece of beginning recovery. You gotta be ready. If you're not ready, you're gonna be just like you said. You don't want to hear it. Everybody said it. Don't tell me what to do. I can do it myself.
Mm-hmm.
So that readiness factor is really, really important.
I completely agree with that. Now I'm just going to get into some of my story, what life was like growing up, what happened, where I'm at now with things, and then I'll close with a couple quotes and leave time for questions if you guys have any. Like I said, I have addiction issues also. I always knew that I was different. Best way to sum up my life is these two early childhood memories. There was a pond outside of the farmhouse I grew up in, Columbiana, and this pond was in a clawfoot bathtub off to the side of my porch. There was goldfish in it, very tranquil, calming spot, and I can remember looking at it, turning around backwards and just trust falling into it, and it's like this impulsive action created all this turbulence, and that sums up my life in a nutshell. Another thing that really describes my life overall was this early childhood dream I had of being in a moving car, being in the back seat and trying to get control of the wheel. The car is just going all over the place and it's just being out of control, really. Some facts about my life: my aunt committed suicide when I was 5 or 6 years old, and just to show like where my mind was at then, I have this memory of walking on a frozen creek bed in November, thinking about what death would be like and what it would be like when I die, how it would be cold, black, lonely, just extreme isolation. And that's one of the things I think with people with mental illness, a lot of them are very intelligent people, and that's actually part of the problem. Sometimes we can think ourselves into our own misery. Another defining moment in my early childhood was my parents' divorce. They divorced when I was in second grade. It was very toxic. They were never physically violent to each other. There was a lot of intense emotional and verbal abuse that was flung back by both of them. And my older brother and I were kind of the middlemen, message carriers. I don't blame them. My parents did the best that they could, and everybody gets their own trauma handed down to them in some way, shape, or form. So everybody's got something. Next big event that was traumatic for me, my dad remarried, and the attention fell off by the wayside, and I started reaching out for attention in negative ways. The earliest way of me doing that was running away from home in the middle of winter, finding this box that had no sides on it, putting this little rug over top of the box to keep the wind and the snow out, and sitting out in the field for 2-3 hours while my family was calling for me, looking for me. I basically went back in on the verge of hypothermia. So these extreme responses to situations were pretty much ingrained in me. First interaction with the law, I was in 5th grade when I committed some acts of vandalism because I couldn't sleep, because I was so worried about the next school year starting, and I just wanted to fit in. I wanted to be like everybody else, But I never felt like everybody else. I never felt comfortable being me. Later on, I got pulled out of class, suspended from school for that. Shortly thereafter, I started using substances. I got in trouble the first time I ever smoked pot, not because I got caught smoking pot, but because of the behaviors with it. I had tried booze periodically throughout my life, a sip here and there. First time I ever actually drank, freshman year, I blacked out. Slept behind a mattress behind Ames department store that used to be on Kirk Road. Middle of February, yet again, underneath a mattress covered in broken glass and mud. So, my life wasn't going good places very early on. sometime around that point, maybe 5-6 months later, I went and talked to a therapist because I told my mom just how depressed I felt, how lonely I felt, how isolated I felt. The counselor at that time told me that I had bipolar disorder. They put me on medication. I didn't like the way that it made me feel, so I continued to self-medicate through the use of substances. Eventually got put into rehab. Just jumped through hoops with that, kept using different things. Eventually I got arrested senior year in high school for having pot, juvenile justice center. I was in the juvenile drug court program, in and out of the juvenile justice center. And this kept creating this deeper feeling of isolation, this deeper feeling of disconnection from everybody else, because nobody else I knew was having these experiences. I tried to better myself at one point, went to YSU, because this 9-month program ended up lasting me a year and a half. So I was trying to start college like other people my age. Ended up getting put back in the juvenile justice center for dirty urine and missing my classes. Ended up dropping out. At some point I tried to get my life together again. I went to culinary school. Traveled around a lot, cooking. First place I went was Vegas, so with an addictive personality and all sorts of other things. Not probably the best place for me. Ended up homeless there at one point to try to prove a point to my dad who had moved out there. The other issue that I didn't really mention was I've always had issue in romantic relationships. So I had a woman who had moved out there to be with me. That kind of fell apart, moved away. Yet again, this time even further from everybody else I knew, up north of Seattle. Ended up quitting that job, ended up being homeless, drifting down the coast to Northern California, homeless there for a bit, sleeping on a beach. My mom sent me money to stay in a hotel. Sometimes I would spend it on the hotel, sometimes getting high or whatever. Then this shifting and moving around and not really having any direction continued for a while. Eventually I was back in Northern California. Tried to quit drinking because of a woman, because women were always my solution, I told myself. Her and I quit together. I was managing a kitchen at this point. I didn't stop smoking pot, and I didn't know how to deal with any of the stress that was relative to having a failing relationship at that point. Managing a kitchen, and also just trying to live at that time I was 28 years old. I stopped being able to eat. I stopped being able to sleep. I started to have these crazy thoughts. People were out to get me. People were watching me. I knew some kind of secret information that was transmitted from outer space. Aliens were after me. My girlfriend was an alien. The police were the forces of good and evil, and they were going to take me to this station to launch me off of Earth and get me in touch with the real people, because the people on this Earth were crazier than I was, because I still don't understand how people treat each other the way they do. that's even in the best mental health I've been in my life. That's neither here nor there. So they diagnosed me as bipolar. They put me on medication. Ended up having to move back home. So I lost the job, the girlfriend, everything that I had built up out there. Moved back home with this stigmatized label. Wasn't able to work because I had such bad social anxiety. Felt uncomfortable at my house, felt uncomfortable around my family because I wasn't working. I just had been psychotic for however long. Eventually I stopped taking that medication because I was one for making good decisions. I went back to work and things seemed to be going okay. I started working again. Substances came back into my life, and those issues started to pop up again. Eventually I quit the job I was working. I caught a DUI in there. I have 3 DUIs in my life, which aren't necessarily relevant to the mental health thing, so I left them out. But I had the DUI, had a job, quit that job, started looking for a substitute to the substances I was using. So I concocted this cocktail of various substances, ingested it, and I ended up being psychotic for the better part of a year, completely out of my mind. And then after that, it was again just that paralysis. How do I go forward with anything? How do I piece my mind back together after being psychotic for a year? how can I talk to people about this experience where I don't even understand it? Like in that one, I thought I thought there was cameras in the walls watching me, that I was on like a reality show for celebrities, that my parents were trying, like my mom was trying to harm me, that people were actually replaced with like robots or aliens or things like that. And that's just scratching the surface. I don't have time to get into all the stuff that I thought. I don't even understand all the stuff that I thought. But yeah, I just kind of drifted through life after that. I met another woman. It is a reoccurring theme in my life. And I tried to like get better for her, which is a recipe for disaster in lots of ways. But I got a job, started working that job, still smoking weed. Just couldn't do it. Couldn't do the cooking thing anymore. I didn't have the same tolerance for stress. Didn't have any healthy coping mechanisms. Woman faded out of my life. Again, drifted through life. Same woman came back into my life about a year later. And I had stepped away from drinking. I wasn't smoking as much, and I had this like moment of clarity where I recognized how I was treating her in some ways, and I saw that I was 32 going on 13 or something with how I interacted with everything. Like they say that when you start using, your emotional development stops. And then when you couple that with the diagnosis of manic depression, which they said was, or bipolar disorder, which they said was also led to drug-induced psychosis from the substances I use, also with borderline personality disorder, which is chaotic interpersonal relationships, it becomes difficult to navigate things, especially when you're adding substances to it. But anyhow, I looked at that and I decided something had to change. I started going to NAMI group meetings because I didn't have any friends really at that point. Nobody wants to hang out with the person that's been out of their mind for forever.
When and where was that?
The NAMI thing?
Mm-hmm.
That would have been in this area, and that would have been not the summer of 2017, summer of 2016. So that was about a year and a half ago now.
How did you find out about NAMI?
I honestly don't remember. I think I just looked for something that dealt with mental health and wound up going there. Actually, I sent Hope an email because I found the website, and she didn't respond to me right away, and I sent her this scathing email, which is embarrassing to think about now. But it also shows how compassionate Hope was, because she recognized that I was just a person suffering from this condition, separated the two, and Hope and I have a really good relationship now. She's somebody I can turn to for good advice, and out of anybody outside of my family, she's probably seen how much I've grown through this experience. Because I was a fractured person when I met her, and I was very angry and so unsure. That's how so unsure of myself. That's how I responded. It had nothing to do with her. With that involvement with things and getting to feel a part of and finding community, which I think is critical, finding community that's going the same direction. I once heard a quote where someone said, "You are the 5 people you surround yourself with the most." And that's something that I have held dear to me now. I eventually got into a 12-step program, so I stopped using substances, developed meditation practice, yoga practice, started talking about my experiences very early on. My first time talking about my experiences, I think I had about a month clean, and I talked to police in the crisis intervention thing, which was horrifying, because if you would have told me 6 months prior I'd be talking to 20 cops, I'd be thinking I was going to jail or something. But like, kept talking about my experiences. I started a podcast kind of talking about my experiences with that and with spirituality, writing about my experiences. Like, I went all in, because I just couldn't live how life was anymore. Because I remember that feeling the last day that I used, where I knew that there was more to my problem than substances. I knew that there was more to my problem than just mental illness. So it was all linked together. And the last day that I used anything wasn't the most I ever used or the worst situation, but it was this feeling of complete desperation, isolation, brokenness, and just saying, what can I do to make my life better? And it's surreal. Like, I've had to do a bunch of work. It hasn't always been easy. I don't do everything perfectly today. I make mistakes because I'm human, not because I have a mental illness or because I have addiction issues. The thing that I have done right is not picked up any substances. I had 16 months on the beginning of January. January 2nd, I had 16 months clean from everything. I was actually cleared to come off mental health medication by my doctor, which I don't necessarily think is for everybody, but he said that I've done all the right things. I also walk my dog, I eat healthy, like all these different things in combination, surrounding myself with the right people, talking about it is what helps me. I was always anti-medication up until I needed it, and then I realized that it is an important part of getting stabilization back, but it also can become a band-aid for people if they don't do the other footwork required to go forward. And that's just my own personal experience and my own personal opinion. I couldn't have got better without the medication, but there came a point where I couldn't get better if I would have stayed on the medication, because it made me feel high and kept me down, really. Now I have a job. My hours are cut and I'm somewhat frustrated by it, but I'm not acting out ridiculous like I used to. I'm exploring dating, finding different ways to relate to people, finding different ways to deal with stress. I've always had issues talking to men, like having men as friends or having men as mentors. The gentleman who's helped me through my step work in the 12-step fellowship is probably the last person I would have thought would do it. He's like I forget what branch of the service he was in, but he was in the service, very tough-knuckled, straight to the point guy, and that's actually what I need, because he doesn't BS me. He tells it like it is, makes me angry sometimes. Sometimes that's what I need. I don't need everything all fluffy. I need the truth sometimes. And life's good. Not perfect. I'm learning how to accept that it's never going to be perfect, and I have to do the work. I'm working on publishing a book of my poetry from some of my travels and stuff like that. Work on publishing a book on my life. Like, working on all these different projects and exploring things. Another key thing that I want to mention, then I'll read these quotes and leave time for questions, is creativity has been such a key part of healing myself, whether it's been painting that I've done, jewelry that I make, music that I work on, poems that I write, all this stuff. Like, I think that's something that people need to explore in order to be able to heal themselves. They have to find what works for them, though. And everybody has that ability. It's just a matter of shutting off those little voices in our, like, I'm not good enough, I can't do this, nobody will like it. I wish I could do it for everybody, but I can't only do it for me. And these are the quotes that I want to share, and they're all by Dr. Gabor Mate. When we flee our vulnerability, we lose our full capacity for feeling emotion. And that's one of the things I did in my own life personally. Like, I wanted to stop feeling. So I got that eventually, which made me do a bunch of stuff that I wish I wouldn't have done. It also caused my brain to kind of short circuit and act out how it did. We readily feel for the suffering child, but cannot see the child in the adult who, his soul fragmented and isolated, hustles for survival a few blocks away from the shop we work, from where we shop or where we work. That's kind of how I felt at times, where people just saw this broken individual, but they didn't realize that I was just hurt inside and didn't know how to heal all that stuff. And this is my favorite one of these quotes. Whether these features become talents or problems depends, in short, on how the child's nature is nurtured. A lot of my gifts and natural abilities were kind of viewed as curses when I was going through school or things like that, or even just upbringing, because people were tired, didn't want to acknowledge some of the things I had. And I'll be honest about my part in it too. I didn't maybe have the best way of expressing them then, but it's all about how those things are guided. Today I'm learning how to turn some of my character defects into assets, because they can be reutilized, and it's how they're expressed, I guess. That's just my experience. I'm only an authority on my own experience, so it is possible to heal, though. Like I said, I have good days, bad days like everybody else, but life is 1,000 times better I don't think about getting high. I don't think about hurting myself. I haven't been hospitalized since I've been off my medication or anything like that. Like, yeah, I'm just trying to get back to quote unquote normal. I don't think normal exists anyhow. Everybody's definition of it's different.
Do you have a local physician,
Like a family doctor?
a psychiatrist?
I do have a psychiatrist. He cleared me to come off stuff, and I go and I talk to a psychologist on a relatively regular basis.
Okay.
So,
And do you have a therapist also?
yeah, that's my psychologist, yeah.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah, I still talk to people about stuff, but they're of the understanding that if I'm able to function without it, I don't necessarily need medication or supervision for it, so.
Right, that has to feel good.
It really does, because one of the things for me is always being anti-medication. It was hard for me to take it, and then once I finally got into a recovery thing, not wanting to take any drugs because it made me feel intoxicated, and it kind of affected my ability to wake up and be clear-headed. That was very important. And now to like actually be in a state where I've done the footwork to kind of retrain my brain to function properly, which is neuroplasticity, I believe is what it's called in neuroscience.
Good. Thank you. Anybody have questions for Ross? How was your family during this, let's say, the last couple of years?
Well, I lived with my mom. My dad was out in Chicago. He didn't really understand a lot of it. I've talked to him about it since then. Him and I have a better relationship than we've ever had, probably since I was a kid. My mom, she originally made a lot of the experience a lot more difficult because she had her own things to go through. And again, I don't blame her. She had her response. I had my response to everything. It is what it is. I still live with her as I'm getting my life back together because I have a lot of financial things I have to take care of. I mean, it's good now. Again, it's not perfect. There's room for growth on my part. I won't speak on her part because that's her part, but it's definitely a lot healthier. There was a lot of stress and tension, though, especially when I was psychotic or manic or like after the fact. There was a lot of enabling behavior, and there was a lot of manipulative behavior on my part, too. So.
What about siblings?
I have a brother locally, and they experienced it, but not to much of an extent. When I was going through some of the psychosis or the manic episode, I was able to stay there sometimes because of issues with my mom, or issues I created with my mom, I should say. Let me clarify. Let me own up to my part in it. I mean, we're good. I don't really talk to him as much as I would like just because I'm busy with living my life. He's busy with being married, having kids, and working a job. We're on good terms, though.
You have just the one brother?
I also have, my dad remarried. He had, his wife has, 4 kids. I have a stepbrother, 3 stepsisters, and then they also had a kid together, who is my half-brother, Dylan. I was able to go to his graduation, which was actually before I started going to NAMI or started getting off the substances. So, but I still actually got exposed to that part of the family, which I hadn't seen them in years prior to that. I think some even a decade or more. I went up to visit my dad in Chicago this past June. Had a good visit with them, except aside from some political differences. It was cool to like be able to experience that and hang out with my half brother, and yeah, life in every aspect of my life is better than it has been. It's weird how some of the worst experiences in my life are what brought me the best ones later on. Like, I guess everything is what you make of it, though.
So you really believe in recovery?
I live it every day. Like, I wouldn't be here if I didn't. I'd be in a psych ward or be getting high somewhere or worse. I don't even know.
When you first, did you go to some inpatient treatment?
For mental health stuff, certainly, yeah. I was an inpatient in California, and then when I was back here, when I was psychotic for the better part of a year, I honestly was at so many, and I was in such a whacked out state of mind, I couldn't tell you how many places I went to or what specific ones. There was a lot of them. I don't know if some might have been rehab, some were definitely psych wards, some might have been rehab too, though.
Did you have any negative issues with anybody?
That's the thing. It's hard to differentiate negative issues with people when I'm already out of it, really. I definitely had some uncomfortable circumstances, but at the same time, I wasn't in my right state of mind, so it just is what it is. Part of 12-step recovery is kind of just making peace with your past and forgiving everybody and forgiving yourself for going through it and just moving forward with what is now.
Great. Questions? Anybody have an interest in this? Ross, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you sharing with us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I'm grateful to be in the state of mind to do so. Hopefully
Great.
I gave somebody some insight.
Oh, I think you certainly have.
How did you get to the 12-step program?
I had been in and out of them, exposed to them from just my past, really. So it was kind of like the last day that I used, I was like, I need to do something different. And I had tried those things before, but I had never given it a shot. And I was like, I really feel like if I don't do this, I'm going to die or go to jail or a psych ward again. I didn't want any of those options.
So you were basically ready. How do you get to that point of being ready when it seems like you're so far gone?
You just have to be. This is the worst thing about it. You have to become emotionally destroyed and broken enough to actually feel no other solution. There's something in the I want to say it's The Art of War, and a gentleman who wrote The Art of War talks about how when you corner an enemy that you give them no option but to fight their way out. So you should always leave an enemy a way to escape. So life had pretty much cornered me where it was either die or change. And I was afraid to change and I was afraid to die, so I decided to change. Because those were the only options I saw coming up in front of me.
I wish my son could be so where you are today. And right now I can't see it. And I'm wondering, can he ever, because I pray on it, to live a normal life? Or is he to be with me forever in the state of mind he is?
Yeah. I mean, the best thing I can say about that is one thing is my mom accepted that my normal was different than her normal in some way, too. And obviously, I'm not saying that's across the board. When I was being psychotic, obviously I was psychotic, but there's different versions of normal, I guess.
And so you sound a lot similar to my son, but yet he's really gone where I want him to be as you are, but the way it seems right now, I don't see it occurring.
I guarantee you that there was times where nobody thought I would get better. I didn't think I would get better at some point. I thought I would always be the way that I was.
Did you let yourself go?
Oh yeah. I wish I had pictures from back then, or I wish that you could talk to me back then and see what I was like then versus now. It's always possible.